back to episode 5 of season 4 of the 98% Life After Prison. This is a podcast dedicated to the nearly 98% of incarcerated people in North Carolina who will eventually be released back into our communities, often with little more than a $45 gate check. I'm April Barber Scales.
And I'm Judy Van Wyk. Today we're talking about the everyday use of solitary confinement in North Carolina's prisons. But first, we have a big milestone to celebrate. It's been just 3 years since your release, April, and now you're finally truly free. Can you tell us why?
My sentence was commuted March 24th, 2022 by Governor Roy Cooper through a committee that he put in place called the Juvenile Sentencing Review Board. They reviewed cases of us who were sentenced as adults under the age of 18, and as a result, I am one of about 9-ish or so that have been released. And March 24th, this year, I'm completely off parole. I've been chained to the state for 34 and a half years, and now my chains are finally broken.
Whoopee! Does it feel any different?
No, because freedom is a state of mind. I mean, physically, I've been free for 3 years. Mentally, it does allow me to have slightly more freedom. Although I was pretty flexible with my parole. I didn't have bad POs, but for some reason, the one thing that I do look forward to doing is voting again, because I'm the person that feels like my vote really makes a difference.
Oh, wow. That's great. And that's a big thing. Yay. Turning back to today's show, according to Disability Rights North Carolina, on any given day, as many as 2,400 people in North Carolina's prisons are confined to a cell the size of a parking space. It's called many things: restrictive housing, the hole, segregation or seg for short, special housing unit, or the SHU for short. But it all boils down to one reality: people caged in isolation for 22 to 24 hours a day. People can be confined to solitary anywhere from a few days to several months to even years in some cases.
Solitary confinement is supposedly used to protect prison residents and staff from dangerous people. But in practice, it's used for a lot of different reasons, such as punishment for smoking a cigarette or talking back to a guard, even talking to a suspected gang member. At the same time, research consistently and conclusively shows prolonged periods of isolation cause severe psychiatric harm, physical impairment, and trauma. In addition, half of the suicides in prison happen in solitary.
Drew Dahl is a reentry coordinator for the Religious Coalition for a Nonviolent Durham. He says his time in solitary has left him a changed man. Here's his story. You went to prison. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What sent you to prison? How long you were there?
Sure. I embezzled a boatload of money from companies I worked for. And I ended up going to prison for 4 years.
And it's my understanding that you spent time in solitary confinement.
I did. I spent 15 months in solitary.
That's a relatively long time.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. The first week or two, you feel like you're losing your mind because you've gone from generally being of course you're locked up, but you have some ability to move around, to being in a cell that was 4 steps one way and 2 steps the other. And there's no TV. You're very limited. You can have a book or two at a time, but you have no communication with anyone. other than 3 times a day when somebody comes by to give you a meal. And so, it's, that first week or two is you're just bouncing off the walls. And then I think, eventually, at least for me, you have to get to the point that you're not thinking about the past, you're not thinking about the future. The only way to survive that is to really focus on just being in the moment you're in right there. Because if you try to think about the future, you'll just drive yourself nuts. Because you have no control. You have no ability to make anybody let you out. You're there until they decide to let you out. And it's terrifying in some ways because, you realize that I could have a seizure or I could have a heart attack and die, and no one would know because they only check on you every few hours. I work a lot with in solitary NC. And when we say it's torture, that's absolutely what it is. It's torture. And it has long-term psychological and physical impacts.
After 15 months in solitary, what was it like to get out?
Oh, very weird. It feels very weird. I think the biggest thing that kind of freaks you out is you're used to having nobody around you. And then you go back into general population, and general population is crowded. I mean, when I was at Johnson, we had 60 guys in a dorm that had been built for like 30. So, I mean, you're just crowded. And so you go from complete isolation and privacy, I mean, a lot of ways, to where you have none of that. And for 15 months, you don't have to interact with anybody. I mean, other than, even the people who come by and feed you, most of the time they're just handing you a thing going on. So you very rarely have to have any conversation. And now there are people around you all the time and you're having to interact with folks. And yes, it feels really, really weird.
Was there like a circumstance or a moment or something that happened during that 15 months that stands out to you? Or was it just all this one kind of blur?
So when I first was in solitary, there was a window that I could look out because you didn't get paper, so eventually you kind of lose track of what day it is. But I could look out that window, and down the road I could see a church, and so I would know when it was Sunday because the church would be full. And I guess about 6 months in or so, for some reason, the administration decided to paint over those windows. And of course, no one told us why, but they painted over those windows, and not to be able to see out, because at least you could look out and see and know what day it was. And to lose that was, that was ugly.
You are allowed an hour or some time outside, yes or no?
I didn't go outside that entire 15 months. You are supposed to get an hour. I don't know if it's an hour a day or hour every other day. That didn't happen. And the only explanation I ever got for that when you'd ask would be, well, we don't have the staff to do that. And that's, and that continues to this day, is the system when they're unable, there's so many places now, especially coming out of the pandemic, where services just aren't being provided. And the reason given is, well, we don't have the staff to do that. When we've talked about in our work to try to end solitary, when we've had discussions with DAC about trying to adopt the Mandela Rules on solitary, on the use of solitary, the response we get is, one, well, it's staff safety. And the other is, well, we just don't have the staffing to provide alternatives to solitary. But, if you want to incarcerate folks, you have a responsibility to staff the prisons adequately. And if the state isn't paying enough to attract correctional officers, then the state needs to pay more.
Tell us what the Mandela Rule is.
So the Mandela Rules are named for Nelson Mandela, and they are a set of rules that restrict the use of solitary. So it limits the amount of days someone can be in solitary. It prescribes the amount of days you have to be out of solitary before you can be put in. I think one of the things that's especially important is the Mandela Rules prohibit the use of solitary for folks that already have pre-existing mental health or emotional health issues and pregnant women. And you would think, well, why in God's name would you put a pregnant woman in solitary? But we do. So, but yeah, as I said, and it's internationally recognized, countries around the world. And that's always budget. Well, we can't do that. Well, countries that we would say, well, that's a third world country or a developing country, they manage to do it. If they can figure out how to do it, why can we not?
You say that it was torture. How did you not go crazy?
You turn your mind off. You become very focused on just being present in the moment you're in. Yeah, and that's you have no choice, because they're not going to let you out. Banging on the door doesn't do any good. There were guys that would go on a food strike. They don't care. I mean, eventually you'll get weak enough where they'll take you and put you in the infirmary and feed you through a tube until you recover enough that they can put you back in the cell. So the only thing you can do is endure, and you endure by just turning it off. You don't think about the future. You don't think about the past. You just are present in the moment you're in.
But how do you spend that time? That's a lot of time.
I walked in circles a lot. And I mean, and there are numerous studies that will demonstrate that even 3 days in solitary has long-term psychological effects. Anyone who has spent significant time in solitary has lifelong mental health issues coming from that. The use of solitary is it's much like, saying, well, when your kids are growing up, well, I'm just going to beat you until you behave. That doesn't have the impact that people seem to think. Putting someone in solitary and say, well, I'm just going to lock you away. You're going to let them out eventually. And the tough thing of that is you're going to let someone that you created mental health issues for or exacerbated existing mental health issues, and eventually you're going to let them back out in the public. And DAC is providing no mental health treatment for those folks they've locked in solitary. And so you take someone who either already has mental health issues or who you create mental health issues for, you don't treat them, and then you dump them out on the public. How does that increase public safety? How does that make us more safe as a community? And it's not that, well, you're saying we shouldn't punish criminals. No, I mean, I did what I did. It was a bad thing. I got punished. That's right. But if we have a corrections department and the end result of that is not making our community safer, well, then there's something wrong with that. And when we structure the corrections department so that we increase the risk and likelihood of violence in the community, that's just fundamentally a stupid thing for us to do. And yet we do it day in and day out.
How has it affected you long term?
So my office at home, I have an office at the house. I am most comfortable when I'm in that room with the door shut. In fact, it just bugs me to be in that room with the doors open. I feel more comfortable in an enclosed space now. And I handle conversation in chunks, but I can get super irritable if I feel like the conversation is going on too long. Or someone, the people just keep on talking, and it's like, I just get very irritable with that. I'm much more of just tell me the facts. That I don't have a tolerance for. Let's just sit down and chat. Yeah, no. I want to have I want to, whatever the facts are, whatever we have to deal with, let's talk about that and then move on. Yeah. And for God's sake, stop talking.
What do you think it would take to end the practice of solitary confinement in prisons and jails?
Well, so one, commitment by the state to adopt the Mandela Rules. But with that would be a requirement on the part of the state then to fund DAC to provide alternatives. Because there are folks that, have gone to solitary because they are not functioning well in general population. But there's a reason they're not functioning well. And there are, if you look around the world, you look around the U.S., there are alternatives to excessive use of solitary. But they cost money. And they require DAC to take the position that we're willing, actually it starts with the legislature, taking the position that we're willing to spend the money to effectively treat the mental health, substance abuse, dual diagnosis issues that are driving these antisocial behaviors that we're currently addressing by throwing someone in a box and trying to forget about them, which only kicks the can down the road because that doesn't fix anything. So if we want to create a safer community inside the prison and long-term, we want to create safer communities in North Carolina as a whole, then we need to be willing to make the commitment to spend the money to treat the issues that are driving that behavior.
When Drew talks about staff shortages, it's a big reason the Department of Correction gives for not even attempting to end solitary confinement. And with staff shortages of 40% across the state, it's something that desperately needs to be addressed. The problem with underpaying, undertraining, and understaffing makes wardens that much more dependent on solitary confinement as a management tool. That, in turn, has been shown to lead to higher recidivism rates, and it's a vicious cycle. April, you did time in solitary. What was your experience like?
There was no air conditioning when I was in solitary, so in the summertime, you had to wet your sheets just to stay cool. And the staff got even lazier because they were just as hot as you were, if not hotter, with those polyester uniforms on, that they would barely bring you ice to your cell when it was part of their duties.
That does sound like torture.
Barbaric, yes, very barbaric.
Very barbaric. Wow. Talking about you didn't have air conditioning. I met a woman yesterday. We were at Duke with so I am part of End Solitary North Carolina. I'm a volunteer with them. And we take this solitary replica cell to different sites across the state just to raise awareness. So yesterday we were at Duke and I met a woman named Sangria, who I believe you know, Sangria Noble, who had come all the way from Charlotte to tell her story. She's just spent 30 days in solitary confinement but she did it up in Troy, and they had air conditioning. It was the only place that was air conditioned at all, was solitary. But it was so damp and so cold that she developed pneumonia. And she described lying there just sick as a dog, just couldn't do anything, just sweating, but shivering. And none of the guards came until finally a fellow inmate complained to the guards, and they finally realized that she was lying there basically dying.
Yeah. Well, as we know, they're very slack, understaffed, underpaid, and they just don't really show a lot of care. They're there just for a reason. They're there for a paycheck. So I know that, a lot of people died. Well, not a lot, but I have seen people die for various reasons throughout my incarceration. So, and being in solitary by yourself for 23 hours at least, sometimes a whole 24 hours a day, is an example of why they could die, because they're unmanaged. They're not checked on. They're not taken care of mentally or physically.
Yep, absolutely. It's also been shown that people of color are punished with solitary confinement more frequently and for longer periods of time than their white counterparts. A vivid example of this disparity is seen in the most severely restricted housing, high security maximum control, or HCON. Even though 60% of the total prison population are people of color, they make up 80% of the population of HCON. And these kind of disparities show up throughout the carceral system.
We are next going to meet Daquan Peters, a veteran of both state and federal prison. As Daquan himself says, going to prison usually meant going to the hole. This is how he tells it.
I'm born and raised in Wilmington, North Carolina. My grandmother was a community organizer. She did the same thing that I do, advocate for true peace, true freedom, true justice, true equality. That's what I come from. I come from a family of individuals, my grandmother, who just stood against oppression. I grew up in a household where my grandmother would tell me, don't you ever in your life bow your head or look down to no white man. That's what I come from. And I think at a young age, that stuck with me. But before she can really expound on what that means, I was already too far gone, into a culture or a world that wasn't conducive to me growing and developing to being a better person than I was then. I was young. At 9, 10 years old, I know what it's like to be walking down the street, and the first time I ever saw a Dukes of Hazzard flag, that racist flag. 9, 10 years old, walking down the street, a group of white guys ride past me in a truck and throw beer on me and call me a nigger. That never left my mind. I coupled that with what my grandma always told me, never bow down and look down to no white man. So I come from a racist culture, a racist background, a racist town, a racist place where it was just normal for them to do that to us. But it's not normal for us to fight back against that. I come up in a household where my grandmother would instill that in us. And so what I did was I developed that mindset. And when I entered into the streets, it just took a negative turn and placed me in situations that wasn't conducive to my growth, order, and development. When you walk outside of your door and all you see is desolation, you see poverty, you see lack of opportunities, you see no resources. You go in your house and you see your mother struggling, you see no food on the table, you see her trying to figure out how to pay project rent. Project rent is cheap. And when you can't afford to pay project rent, something wrong. So in my young mind, I began to say, yo, you know what? I don't want to see my mama go through this. I can go outside and get me some real easy money. But that easy money was tearing my community up. That easy money was the reason why we didn't have no food on the table. I went to prison at the age of 17. I didn't come home till I was 24. So essentially, I grew up in the streets first, and then I spent the rest of my time growing up in prison.
So you went to prison at the age of 17. Was it for drugs?
I went to prison for robbing another drug dealer. I went to prison for allegedly kicking in another person, going in another person's house and robbing another drug dealer.
You were in state prison twice.
I was in state prison 3 times. I've been in state prison 3 times.
And then you were sent to federal prison. Can you tell me that story a bit?
I was sentenced to 2007. Federal government arrested me for distribution of crack cocaine. Once I entered into the federal system, it was a cultural shock. I knew that I didn't deserve to be in prison for that long for the drugs that I allegedly distributed. So I began to learn the law. I began to study the law. I began to fight my case. I spent at least 4 to 6 hours every day in the law library. So I began to educate myself. I began to surround myself around individuals who this world called the worst type of people, but they were the most brilliantest people in the world. These were the people that saved my life. These were the people that taught me how to sit in front of you right now and have this conversation. A lot of those guys, they shaped, they molded me into becoming a good man, a good father, a good community person, you know? And I told myself, if I ever come back home again, I'm gonna be an asset instead of a liability to my community.
Can you tell us about, first of all, how that came about? Had you ever been in solitary confinement before you were in federal prison?
I've been in I'm gonna say this. I spent literally, I'm about to be 49 years old, Allah willing, in January. I could tell you right now, I've spent over half my life in prison. And doing that, I've never been to prison where I haven't been to the hole. Like, for real, every time I go to prison, I'm going to solitary confinement. The reason why I'm going to solitary confinement is because I'm not going to let you treat me and talk to me in any kind of way. If you yelling at me, I'm standing up to that. No, you're not going to talk to me like that. I'll put my hands out readily and tell you to put the handcuffs on me and take me to the hole before I let you treat me as if I'm not a person. I wasn't a model inmate. I wasn't. I don't come from a well-off family, so in prison I have to do certain things to survive, to make sure that I can still be able to go to commissary. So my duty as a father don't stop because I'm in prison. I still have to take care of my kids. So I'm a hustle while I'm in there. I'm not going to lie. I hustle when I'm in prison because that's how I got to survive. That's how I got to take care of me. That's how I got to take care of my family. So in the process of me doing that, I might get in trouble. I'm going to the hole. Prison already make you feel helpless, hopeless, but when you go in that box, oh my God, all you got is your thoughts. No social senses. All your social senses are deprived. I've spent months in that place. Months. To the point where as if you become used to it. Like, I know people who will go to the hole just to get away from people. That's a mental disorder. That is a mental disorder that you have developed while in prison. And if you had a mental disorder prior to going to prison, what that does is it exacerbates that.
What was the longest time you spent in solitary?
Okay, I spent at least straight about 7 months. You get a shot, you go to the hole today, you might be in there for about a month while they do their allegedly investigation. Once they do their investigation, they charge you. Then you got to wait till your DHO hearing. DHO is disciplinary hearing officer. You got to wait another month before you go to see him. You done been in there 2 months now. Then when you see him, he give you 3-4 months. Now you done been in there about 5 months, you know? And the only difference in federal prison and state prison is you might have a cellie. You might have a cellie in your cell with you in federal prison. In state prison, you don't have a cellie. You're in there by yourself. No books. Some places you don't get books. Some places, the police can control the light outside of your cell where you can't control it in the cell. And they'll do certain things. They'll flick that light on and off, messing with you. So that's the things that strong men put in themselves to survive that experience. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to become a subject of theirs. You become a toy to them, something they can play with. You do whatever they say do, how they say do it, when they say do it. You have no autonomy over your life.
Do you believe that's part of the purpose?
It is. Prison is designed to, let me say this. Mental health is one's emotional, psychological, and social well-being. That is what the mental health is. Those 3 aspects: emotional, psychological, and social well-being. What does incarceration do? It challenges your social, psychological, and emotional well-being. You can't put your child in a closet right now. It'll be called a certain thing if you lock your child in a closet for being bad. They will tell you that would psychologically mess that child up for the rest of his or her life.
It's abuse.
It's abuse. So if you consider placing your child into a closet abuse, imagine what that is for an adult. When you lock that person in somewhere, it murders a person's soul, man. It's painful. It's a painful experience. It's like you of life, but you're not living. Okay, I'm of life, but I have no purpose for living right now. Help me. Dear Lord, help me. This is what we have to do in that box. When you in solitary confinement, that's all you got. You don't have nobody else. You fighting to keep your sanity in solitary confinement. You fight to keep your identity in solitary confinement. You fight to keep yourself being a human. What it did for me was it made me emotionally numbing to the point where as if my emotions are flat. Emotions don't exist. So I could take whatever you give me. You didn't make me, you're not going to break me. You can lock my body, but you're not going to trap my mind.
What did you do to survive that? How did you keep yourself from going crazy?
My creative intelligence. Having an imagination.
What did you imagine?
What life can be for me if I just do the right thing. You know, that I wasn't put to be in nobody's cage. I wasn't put on this earth to be locked up in somebody's cage. That shit painful. You know, it's when you think about all of the stuff that your family been through, just having this conversation, reliving it. When you sit in that box, And you think about, what the hell am I doing here? What the hell? What is this box designed to do? Why did they create something like this right here? Why would you create a dark hole to put somebody in, a human being?
What has enabled you to go forward?
Pain. Learning how to cope with pain. What has enabled me to move forward is this right here. I'm going to fight this system till I can't even breathe no more. If I have to sip a little air, I'm fighting. That's what motivates me. My pain, my struggles, my community, sitting here looking at things, being in these meetings, being in these conversations, and just, my lived experience. I have a bathroom downstairs. I have a bathroom in my bedroom that I could take 3 footsteps and go in. But I would rather come all the way downstairs and go into this little bathroom, the size of a little cell, and I'm at peace in there. And I don't want nobody else to use it. You know what I mean? Because of my mental disorders that I have that has developed while I'm incarcerated by being in the hole so much. I done been in the hole so much that I put myself in the hole and I'm out here in the world. Because that's my think tank.
If you were going to give advice to someone who is going into solitary, what would you say to them in order to survive?
Learn to love yourself. Do everything in your power to love you, to figure out how you don't ever have to go back through that again. You take that time and you use that time as a focal point of building your character. You don't got no distractions. Just think about it. You don't have no distractions in the box. And a lot of people don't know how to deal with their thoughts. Sometimes your thoughts can take you places that will make you think you crazy. But who gave us that word crazy? A mental disorder does not mean that you are crazy. It just means that you don't have the coping skills to be able to deal with whatever you're dealing with. So whatever you going through, if I had some advice to give somebody, man, learn to love yourself. Take that time and say, you know what? God or whoever you believe in or whatever ideology you from or whatever, culture you're in, utilize that time to become more in tune with yourself.
Listening to Daquan and Drew talk about their experience in solitary, you begin to understand why the Mandela Rules consider more than 15 days spent in the hole to be torture. How long did you spend in solitary, April?
Well, I had various stints in solitary, but the majority of which were no longer than 60-day stints. And as far as the stats that you mentioned, I hate to pull a race card, but we just don't bend as much as our counterparts do. People of color do not. I think it's embedded probably within our DNA. With DNA, we've just been broken down and been discriminated and just being so hard on from day one that, there's some things that we just won't bend on, and we'd rather just take the punishment.
And that's what Daquan said. I mean, that's exactly what he said. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's our show for today. Join us next time when we talk to Dr. Craig Waleed, who did a stint in solitary as a young man serving prison time in New York. Today, he leads the End Solitary North Carolina project for Disability Rights North Carolina.
Dr. Waleed will share his story, and we'll talk about what's needed to end solitary confinement in state prisons and jails. Until then, check us out on Facebook and Instagram. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can email us at 98%.lifeafter@gmail.com.
Until next time, this is the 98% Life After Prison.